Story 1. The Truck Stop That Stole Hours. Gerald Montgomery had been driving long-haul routes for 27 years, and he thought he'd seen every kind of truck stop America had to offer. From gleaming travel centers with restaurants and showers to sad little parking lots with vending machines and porta-potties, Gerald had stopped at them all. But in March of 2023, he pulled into a truck stop on Interstate 40 in New Mexico that didn't follow the normal rules of time. Gerald was hauling a load of electronics from Los Angeles to Dallas, a route he'd driven at least 50 times before. He knew every town, every rest area, every good place to fuel up along the way. Around 2 in the morning, somewhere between Albuquerque and Santa Rosa, Gerald needed a break. His log showed he'd been driving for 9 hours straight, and fatigue was starting to set in. His eyes burned, his back ached, and he needed coffee and a bathroom break. A sign appeared in his headlights. Desert Star Truck Stop, next exit, 24-hour service. Gerald didn't remember seeing this place before, but that wasn't unusual. New truck stops opened all the time, especially along major interstates. He took the exit and followed a short access road to a medium-sized facility with about 20 parking spaces, half of them occupied by other semis. The truck stop looked modern enough. LED lights illuminating the lot, a main building with large windows, fuel pumps that appeared recently installed. Gerald parked his rig, shut down the engine, and checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. He'd take a 30-minute break, use the facilities, grab coffee, and get back on the road. That would put him in Dallas by late afternoon. Inside, the truck stop was clean but strangely quiet. A few other drivers sat at tables, drinking coffee, staring at their phones. None of them looked up when Gerald entered. The cashier behind the counter was a young woman with blonde hair and a name tag that read Sarah. She smiled at Gerald but didn't speak. Gerald used the restroom, then poured himself a large coffee from the self-serve station. The coffee was hot and fresh, which was always a good sign. He grabbed a pre-made sandwich from the cooler and brought everything to the counter. "That'll be $8.50, Sarah said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Gerald paid with a $10 bill and pocketed the change. He sat at a table near the window where he could keep an eye on his truck and ate his sandwich while scrolling through messages on his phone. Everything seemed normal. Just another truck stop, another break in a long night of driving. After finishing his coffee, Gerald stood up to leave. He glanced at his watch. 2:23 a.m. Only 6 minutes had passed, but he'd eaten a sandwich, drunk a full cup of coffee, and spent several minutes in the bathroom. It felt like he'd been in the truck stop for at least 20 or 30 minutes. Gerald shrugged it off. Time always felt weird in the middle of the night when you were tired. He walked back to his truck, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he noticed something odd. The other trucks that had been parked when he arrived were still in the exact same positions. Not moved at all, as if their drivers hadn't left or returned during his entire break. Gerald drove back to the interstate and continued east. He glanced at his dashboard clock as he merged onto I-40. It showed 2:19 a.m., but his watch said 2:23 a.m., a 4-minute discrepancy. Gerald frowned. His dashboard clock was usually accurate. It synchronized with GPS time automatically, but his watch was definitely showing 2:23. He chalked it up to a glitch and kept driving. But over the next hour, Gerald noticed the discrepancy growing. His watch showed 3:30 a.m., but his dashboard clock showed only 2:47 a.m., a difference of 43 minutes. That wasn't a simple synchronization error. Something was wrong with one of his timepieces. Gerald's phone showed 2:47 a.m. matching the dashboard, so his watch must be wrong. But how had it gained 43 minutes in just over an hour? Watches didn't malfunction like that. They might lose time from a dead battery, but they didn't spontaneously jump forward. Then Gerald noticed something else that made his hands tighten on the wheel. His trip odometer showed he'd driven 83 miles since Los Angeles, but according to his GPS and his knowledge of the route, he should have been at least 200 miles from LA by now. He'd been driving for over 9 hours before his truck stop break. Even accounting for slower speeds through cities, he should have covered far more distance. Gerald pulled over at the next rest area and checked his logs. According to his electronic logging device, the federally mandated system that tracked his driving hours, he'd only been on duty for 4 hours and 12 minutes. But Gerald clearly remembered leaving Los Angeles at 5 p.m. the previous evening. It was now approaching 3 a.m. That was 10 hours, not 4. Something had stolen hours from Gerald's life. Between leaving LA and arriving at this rest area, approximately 6 hours had simply vanished. He'd experienced those hours. Remembered driving through twilight, through full darkness, stopping once for fuel in Flagstaff. But according to his truck systems and his phone, those hours hadn't happened. Time had skipped forward, or he'd skipped backward, or something impossible had occurred. Gerald tried to think logically. Had he fallen asleep and dreamed several hours of driving? No. His truck was nearly 200 miles from LA, proved by the landmarks around him. The distance was real, but the time was wrong. Either 6 hours had been compressed into about 90 minutes of experienced time, or 6 hours of his life had been erased from recorded time while he experienced them normally. Then Gerald remembered the truck stop. The Desert Star. That's where the discrepancy had started, where his watch and his dashboard clock had begun disagreeing. Something about that place had affected time, had created a bubble where normal chronology didn't apply. Gerald grabbed his CB radio. Breaker, breaker. Any driver out there familiar with the Desert Star truck stop on I-40 in New Mexico, just west of Santa Rosa? Static answered him for a moment. Then a voice came through, gravelly, old, tired. I know it. You stopped there, didn't you? Yeah, about an hour ago. Why? How much time did you lose? Gerald's blood ran cold. What do you mean, lose? The Desert Star steals time. Everyone who stops there loses hours, sometimes 2, sometimes 5, sometimes more. You go in for a quick break, come out thinking 30 minutes passed, but the world has moved forward 6 hours. Or backward. It works both ways. Some drivers gain time, some lose it. But it's never what you experienced. That's impossible. Is it? Check your logs. Check your odometer. Check anything electronic. They'll all tell you less time passed than what you remember. But your body knows the truth. You're tired like you've been driving 9 hours, aren't you? Even though your logs say 4. Gerald was tired. Exhausted, actually, in a way that didn't match only 4 hours of driving. His fatigue was consistent with nearly 10 hours behind the wheel. What is that place? Gerald asked into the CB. Nobody knows. It's been there for at least 20 years, maybe longer. Some people think it's built on an old Native American site, something sacred or cursed. Others think it's a military experiment, some kind of time dilation field being tested on civilians. I think it's something else. I think it's a crack in time itself, and the truck stop just happens to be positioned over it. Anyone who enters that crack experiences time differently than the rest of the world. Why doesn't anyone shut it down, report it? Who would believe it? You try explaining to a cop that you lost 6 hours in a truck stop and see how that goes. They'll test you for drugs, check you for alcohol, and decide you fell asleep at the wheel. There's no way to prove what happened, and the weird thing is the truck stop doesn't show up on GPS half the time. You saw a sign and took an exit, but if you look at Google Maps or any navigation system, there's no truck stop listed at that location. Gerald pulled up Google Maps on his phone and searched for the Desert Star. No results. He zoomed in on the section of I-40 where he'd stopped. No truck stop was marked on the map. The exit he'd taken didn't even appear to exist according to the satellite imagery. Jesus Christ, Gerald whispered. You're lucky. The CB voice continued. You only lost 6 hours. Some drivers lose days. I heard about a guy who stopped there, came out thinking he'd had a quick coffee break and found out 3 days had passed. His company thought he'd abandoned the load. His wife thought he was dead. 3 days gone in what felt like 20 minutes. How do I get the time back? You don't. It's gone. Whatever you experienced at the Desert Star happened in a pocket of distorted time. For you, it was real. You lived through those 6 hours. But for the rest of the universe, those hours were compressed into about 90 minutes. The time you experienced exists only in your memory now. It's not recorded anywhere except in your own fatigue and your aging body. Gerald sat in his truck at the rest area trying to process this. He'd lost 6 hours of his life to a truck stop that bent time. He'd aged 6 hours while the world aged 90 minutes. If he stopped there again, would he lose more time? Could he lose so much that he'd age years while only hours passed externally? Avoid the Desert Star, the CB voice said, as if reading Gerald's thoughts. Don't go back. Don't try to understand it. There are places in this country that don't follow normal rules, and that truck stop is one of them. Just keep driving and be grateful you only lost hours, not days or weeks. The CB went silent. Gerald tried to raise the other driver again, but got only static. Gerald sat there for another 20 minutes, documenting everything he could remember. He took screenshots of his logs, his odometer, his GPS data. He wrote down every detail of the Desert Star, the layout, the interior, the eerily quiet drivers, Sarah the cashier with her flat, emotionless voice. Then he got back on the road and continued to Dallas. He delivered his load on schedule, or rather, 6 hours ahead of schedule according to the clock, though his body felt like he'd driven the normal amount of time. Gerald never stopped at the Desert Star again. On subsequent trips along I-40, he watched for the exit sign but never saw it. Whatever conditions allowed the truck stop to appear weren't always present. It phased in and out of accessibility, existing in a state between normal reality and something else. Over the following months, Gerald began hearing other stories on the CB. Drivers who'd lost time at mysterious locations, truck stops that didn't appear on maps. Rest areas where minutes inside equaled hours outside. The Desert Star wasn't unique. There were places scattered across America's highway system that existed in temporal bubbles, pockets where time flowed at different rates than the surrounding world. Gerald researched the phenomenon obsessively. He found scattered reports going back decades. Drivers who'd experienced unexplained time loss, who'd arrived at destinations impossibly early or late, who'd aged more than they should have during trips that should have taken fixed amounts of time. The reports were dismissed as confusion, fatigue, or substance use. No one took them seriously. But Gerald knew the truth. He'd lived it. He'd stopped at a truck stop that stole 6 hours from his life, compressed his experience of time while the universe moved forward at a different rate. He'd been lucky. Only 6 hours gone. Others had lost days, weeks, maybe more. Gerald Montgomery continued driving trucks for another 4 years before retiring, but he never forgot the Desert Star, never stopped wondering about the mechanism behind the temporal distortion. Was it natural or artificial? A side effect of some undiscovered physics or a deliberate experiment conducted on unwitting subjects? He never found answers. The Desert Star remained a mystery, a place that appeared and disappeared along I-40, stealing time from drivers who made the mistake of stopping there. Gerald's 6 lost hours were gone forever, existing only in his memory and in the fatigue that had accumulated in his body. 6 hours of aging that the rest of the world never witnessed, never recorded, never acknowledged. The truck stop that stole hours taught Gerald that time isn't as fixed as people assume, that there are places where chronology bends and breaks, where the universe's normal rules suspend themselves for reasons nobody understands. And it taught him that some stops should never be made, some exits never taken because the price of convenience might be hours or days of your life, stolen by places that exist between seconds feeding on time itself. Story 2. The Passenger Who Already Died. Catherine Wells had been driving trucks for 19 years, and she'd made it a strict policy never to pick up hitchhikers. It was company policy, insurance liability, and just common sense. But on a rainy November night in 2023 somewhere along Highway 95 in Nevada, Catherine made an exception that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The rain was torrential, the kind of downpour that reduced visibility to almost nothing despite the wipers running at full speed. Catherine was hauling furniture from Reno to Las Vegas, taking the long route through Nevada's empty interior because the direct highway was closed for construction. She was behind schedule, tired and frustrated by the weather that had slowed her to 40 miles per hour on roads designed for 70. Around midnight, her headlights caught a figure standing on the shoulder, a woman in a light jacket soaked through, thumb extended in the universal gesture of hitchhiking. Catherine's instinct was to drive past, but something made her brake. Maybe it was the weather, the knowledge that anyone stranded out here in this rain could die from exposure. Maybe it was the fact that the hitchhiker was a woman, and Catherine felt a responsibility to help another woman in danger. Catherine pulled onto the shoulder and rolled down her window. The woman approached quickly, rain streaming down her face. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her skull and clothes that looked inadequate for the cold desert night. "Thank you for stopping," the woman said, her voice clear despite the rain. "I broke down about 5 miles back. My phone's dead. I've been walking for over an hour." "Get in," Catherine said, unlocking the passenger door. The woman climbed into the cab, bringing a smell of rain and something else, something faintly chemical like preservatives or formaldehyde. Catherine noticed but didn't comment. Maybe it was just the smell of wet synthetic fabrics. "I'm heading to Las Vegas," Catherine said as she pulled back onto the highway. "I can drop you at the first gas station with a phone." "That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm Emma." "Catherine. Nice to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Emma smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something off about her, though Catherine couldn't identify what. Maybe it was just the stress of being stranded in a rainstorm. They drove in silence for several miles. Catherine kept glancing at Emma, trying to figure out what was bothering her about the passenger. Emma sat very still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield. She didn't fidget, didn't check her pockets for her dead phone, didn't do any of the small, restless movements people usually made in unfamiliar situations. "So what brought you out here?" Catherine asked, trying to make conversation. "I was visiting family," Emma said. "In Tonopah, on my way back to Vegas when my car quit." "What kind of car?" "A Honda Civic, blue, 2015. "Did you see what was wrong with it?" "The engine just stopped. All the lights on the dashboard came on and it rolled to a stop. I don't know much about cars." The conversation felt stilted, Emma's responses coming after slight delays, as if she had to think carefully about each answer. Catherine's unease grew, but she couldn't justify kicking a stranded woman back out into the rain based on a vague feeling. They drove for another 20 minutes, the rain gradually lessening. Catherine was reaching for her CB radio to check road conditions ahead when Emma spoke again. "Do you believe in ghosts, Catherine?" The question caught Catherine off guard. "Ghosts? I don't know. I've never seen one. Why do you ask?" "Because I think I might be one." Catherine's hands tightened on the wheel. She glanced at Emma, trying to determine if this was a joke. Emma's face was serious, her expression troubled. "What do you mean?" Catherine asked carefully. I don't remember breaking down, Emma said. I remember driving and then nothing. And then I was walking in the rain and you stopped. But everything feels wrong, distant, like I'm watching myself from far away. You're probably just in shock from the cold and stress, Catherine said, trying to rationalize it. Once we get you somewhere warm. I died 3 years ago, Emma interrupted, in a car accident, on this highway, November 15th, 2020. Catherine felt ice water flood through her veins. That's not funny. I'm not joking. I remember it now. I was driving to Vegas from Tonopah, visiting family just like I told you. But I never made it. There was another car coming the wrong way, headlights in my lane. I swerved. My car went off the road. I remember the impact, the pain, and then nothing. Stop it, Catherine said. You're not dead. You're sitting right here. You're real. Am I? Emma held up her hand and stared at it. I'm not cold. I should be freezing. I've been walking in that rain wearing this thin jacket, but I don't feel cold. I don't feel anything. Catherine's mind raced. This was insane. Emma was clearly disturbed, experiencing some kind of delusion or dissociative episode, but Catherine couldn't deny the strangeness of the situation, the chemical smell, Emma's unnatural stillness, the way she didn't shiver despite being soaked through. I'm going to drop you at the next town, Catherine said. You need help, medical attention. Look at your mirror, Emma said quietly. Catherine glanced at her rearview mirror. Then she looked at her side mirror. Her breath caught in her throat. Emma didn't have a reflection. Catherine could see herself in the mirrors, could see the cab interior, the rain-streaked windows. But the passenger seat appeared empty. Emma wasn't reflected in any mirror. Oh God, Catherine whispered. I told you, Emma said. I'm not alive. I don't know why I'm here, why I appear sometimes on this highway. Maybe I'm trapped, repeating my last journey over and over. Maybe I don't know I'm dead most of the time and only realize it when someone like you picks me up. Catherine pulled over to the shoulder, her whole body shaking. This wasn't possible. Ghosts weren't real. But Emma had no reflection, and now that Catherine focused, she could see other wrongnesses. Emma's chest wasn't rising and falling with breath. Her eyes didn't blink, and when Catherine looked directly at her, Emma seemed slightly translucent, like an image projected onto the cab interior rather than a solid person. I need you to get out, Catherine said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry, but I can't. You need to get out. I understand, Emma said. She reached for the door handle, then paused. Can I ask you something? Catherine nodded, too terrified to speak. If you pass this way again and you see me, don't stop. Tell other drivers not to stop. I don't want to be picked up anymore. Every time someone stops, I have to remember that I'm dead. I have to experience the moment of realization all over again. It's torture. Please, just let me walk. Let me stay in the delusion that I'm alive, making my way to Vegas, that everything is normal. I will, Catherine managed to say. I promise. Emma opened the door and stepped out into the drizzle. Catherine watched her walk away from the truck back toward the direction they'd come from, retracing her route. Within moments, Emma faded from visibility, not walking out of range, but simply becoming less and less substantial until she vanished entirely. Catherine sat there for 10 minutes, hyperventilating, trying to convince herself she'd hallucinated the entire encounter. But she knew she hadn't. She'd picked up a ghost, a woman who died 3 years ago and was still walking Highway 95, still trying to reach a destination she'd never arrive at. Catherine forced herself to continue driving. She made it to Las Vegas and delivered her load, but she couldn't focus. She kept seeing Emma's face, hearing her voice asking not to be picked up again, not to be reminded of her death. When Catherine got home to Reno 3 days later, she researched accidents on Highway 95 in November 2020. She found the report immediately. Emma Martinez, age 27, killed in a single vehicle accident on November 15th. The details matched exactly what Emma had told her. Driving from Tonopah to Las Vegas, swerved to avoid an oncoming vehicle that was traveling in the wrong lane, went off the road, died on impact. There was a photo attached to the news article. It was definitely the woman who'd been in Catherine's truck. Same face, same dark hair, same age. Emma Martinez had been dead for 3 years, but her ghost still walked Highway 95, still trying to complete her final journey. Catherine never drove that route again. She requested different assignments, took pay cuts to avoid Highway 95 entirely. But she heard stories from other drivers, reports of a young woman hitchhiking between Tonopah and Vegas, always on rainy nights, always friendly and grateful when picked up, always disappearing before reaching any destination. Most drivers who encountered her didn't realize what she was. They'd drop her off at a gas station or rest area, and when they looked back, she'd be gone. They'd assume she'd walked away quickly, not understanding they'd been carrying a passenger who was already dead. But occasionally a driver would notice the wrongnesses. No reflection, no breath, the chemical smell, the translucence. Those drivers would come on the CB, shaken, asking if anyone else had ever picked up a ghost on Highway 95. Catherine would confirm their experience, tell them about Emma Martinez, and pass along Emma's request. Don't stop for her. Let her walk in her delusion. Don't force her to remember she's dead. Catherine Wells retired from trucking 2 years after the encounter. She couldn't shake the memory of Emma's face, the sadness in her eyes when she'd asked not to be picked up again. Catherine had broken her rule about hitchhikers for what she'd thought was a good reason, to help someone in danger, and instead she'd inflicted psychological torture on a ghost who just wanted to complete her final journey in peace. The passenger who already died taught Catherine that death doesn't always end a journey, that some souls are trapped in the moments before their end, repeating the same routes over and over, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for the dead is leave them alone, let them walk in whatever delusion allows them to cope with their eternal repetition, rather than forcing them to confront the truth that their destination will never be reached, because they died before they could arrive. Story 3. The Way Station That Measured Souls. Frank Morrison had been hauling freight for 31 years, and in that time he'd passed through thousands of way stations. They were all the same, bureaucratic checkpoints where state officials verified that trucks weren't overweight, checked logs to ensure drivers weren't exceeding legal hours, and occasionally performed safety inspections. Tedious, but necessary. Frank had never had problems at way stations. He maintained his truck well, kept his logs accurate, and never exceeded weight limits. But in April of 2023, Frank encountered a way station in eastern Oregon that didn't measure the weight of cargo. It measured something else entirely, something that made Frank question the nature of his own existence. Frank was hauling lumber from Portland to Boise, a straightforward run along Interstate 84 through the Columbia River Gorge and across the high desert of Oregon. It was early morning, just after dawn, when he saw the way station sign. All commercial vehicles must enter. Frank signaled and took the exit ramp, pulling into the facility behind 2 other trucks. The way station looked standard, a scale embedded in the roadway, a small building where inspectors worked, a parking area for trucks that needed detailed inspection. Frank rolled onto the scale and stopped, waiting for the green light that would indicate his weight was legal and he could continue. But instead of a green light, the display showed something strange. Instead of a number indicating weight in pounds, the display showed soul weight, 47 grams, condition deteriorating. Frank blinked and looked again. The display hadn't changed. He grabbed his radio and called to the way station office. I'm getting a weird reading on the scale. Says something about soul weight." Static answered him. Frank tried his CB, switching through channels, but couldn't raise anyone. The other trucks that had been in line ahead of him were gone. He hadn't seen them exit, but they were no longer visible in the way station area. A man in a uniform emerged from the office building and walked toward Frank's truck. He looked like a standard DOT inspector. Gray uniform, clipboard, official badge. But something about his movements was wrong. Too fluid, too precise, as if he were a puppet being controlled with invisible strings. The inspector rapped on Frank's window. Frank rolled it down. "Mr. Morrison," the inspector said, checking his clipboard, "we've detected an issue with your load." "There's a problem with the lumber?" Frank asked. "Not the lumber, the other cargo. Your soul is showing signs of degradation. Current weight is 47 grams, down from the standard 53 grams. You've lost approximately 11% of your soul mass over your lifetime. That's approaching the threshold for unsafe operation." Frank stared at the inspector. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Your soul, Mr. Morrison. The non-physical component of your consciousness that animates your body and provides moral guidance. It has measurable weight, 21 grams at the moment of death according to early research, but actually varies between 45 and 55 grams in living humans depending on various factors. Yours is deteriorating, losing mass, becoming less substantial. This is insane. Souls don't have weight, they can't be measured. They can be measured at this way station. That's its purpose. We monitor commercial drivers because you spend so much time alone on the road, making decisions, facing temptations. The solitary nature of trucking creates conditions where souls erode faster than in other professions. We track the degradation and intervene when drivers approach dangerous thresholds. Intervene how? That depends on the cause of soul loss. In your case, Mr. Morrison, the erosion appears to be from accumulated minor moral compromises. Small lies, cutting corners, choosing convenient sins over difficult virtues. Each compromise removes a fraction of soul mass. Over 31 years of driving, those fractions add up to 11% loss. Another 5% and you'll reach the critical threshold where moral decision-making becomes severely compromised. Frank felt like he'd driven into a nightmare. "I want to leave. I'm not staying here for this insanity." "You can't leave until we complete the inspection and remediation process. Please exit your vehicle and come with me to the office." "And if I refuse?" The inspector's face didn't change expression, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and inhuman. "Then your soul will be confiscated entirely and you'll be allowed to continue as a soulless driver. You'll notice some changes: decreased empathy, difficulty feeling emotions, tendency toward cruelty and selfishness. But you'll still be able to operate your vehicle. Many drivers choose this option. It makes the job easier, actually, when you don't care about anything except moving from point A to point B." Frank looked at the road beyond the way station. He could see the exit ramp, see traffic moving normally on the interstate. This facility had no barrier arms, nothing physically preventing him from driving away. He could just punch the accelerator and leave. But something stopped him. Some instinct that told him this wasn't a game, wasn't a prank or hallucination. Whatever this place was, whatever was happening here, it was real in some way that transcended normal reality. "Fine," Frank said. "I'll come to the office." He climbed out of his cab and followed the inspector across the pavement. The way station looked normal from this perspective. Standard government building, American flag on a pole, proper signage. But Frank noticed details that were wrong. The shadows all fell at slightly different angles, as if multiple suns were shining from different positions. The building's windows reflected nothing, just showed black surfaces despite the morning light. Inside, the office was spare. A desk, filing cabinets, a chair. The inspector gestured for Frank to sit. Frank obeyed, his mind still struggling to process what was happening. "Let's review your record," the inspector said, opening a file on his desk. "We have documentation of every moral choice you've made while driving. Here's the complete list of soul mass reduction incidents." The file was hundreds of pages thick. Frank saw dates, locations, descriptions of choices he'd made over 3 decades of driving. Small things, mostly. Lying about delivery times, fudging his logs to drive longer than legally allowed, taking kickbacks from dispatchers for accepting undesirable loads, not reporting unsafe vehicles he saw on the road, ignoring hitchhikers in distress because he didn't want the hassle. Reading the list, Frank felt crushing shame. Each incident had seemed justified at the time, seemed like a reasonable compromise or a necessary expediency. But seeing them all compiled, seeing the pattern of small moral failures accumulating over 31 years, Frank understood the truth. He'd been eroding his own humanity one choice at a time. "I didn't realize," Frank whispered. "Most don't. That's why we monitor. Soul degradation is gradual, imperceptible day to day. But over years, it adds up. You're not a bad person, Mr. Morrison. You're just a person who's made many small bad choices. The question now is whether you want to arrest the degradation or accept it and continue losing soul mass until you reach zero. How do I stop it? Remediation. Moral recalibration. You return to moments where you made choices that cost you soul mass, and you make different choices. Not literally. Time travel isn't available for this purpose. But spiritually, psychologically, you revisit the choices and understand what you should have done differently. The understanding, the genuine remorse, the commitment to better behavior. These things can restore lost soul mass. Not all of it, but enough to bring you back above the danger threshold. Frank spent the next several hours, or what felt like hours, time seemed fluid in the way station office, reviewing his moral history. The inspector walked him through incident after incident, asking Frank to imagine how he could have acted differently, what better version of himself would have done. It was excruciating. Frank confronted his own cowardice, his selfishness, his willingness to compromise integrity for convenience. He saw patterns he'd never noticed. How stress made him more likely to cut corners. How fatigue eroded his moral decision-making. How loneliness made him resentful and cruel. But slowly, Frank also felt something shifting. Understanding brought clarity, and clarity brought resolution. He committed to changing, to being more mindful of moral choices, to rebuilding the soul mass he'd lost through decades of small compromises. Finally, the inspector stood. "That's sufficient. You've restored approximately 3% of lost soul mass. Still below standard, but above the danger threshold. You're cleared to continue operating." "That's it? I just leave?" "Yes, but you'll be monitored. If you continue making choices that erode your soul, you'll be flagged again next time you pass through any way station in our network." "And Mr. Morrison, the degradation accelerates. The less soul you have, the harder it becomes to make moral choices, which causes you to lose soul faster, which makes morality even harder. It's a downward spiral. Arrest it now while you still can." Frank walked back to his truck on unsteady legs. He climbed into the cab and started the engine. The scale display now showed his normal weight, 8,400 pounds of truck and lumber. No mention of souls or degradation. He exited the way station and merged back onto the interstate. In his mirrors, he watched the facility recede into the distance. When he looked at his GPS to mark the location for future reference, the way station didn't appear on the map. The exit he'd taken showed no facilities, just an empty ramp leading to nothing. Frank completed his delivery to Boise, but couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Had it been real? A hallucination? Some kind of psychological break from too many years of driving? But Frank knew it was real. He could feel the truth of it, the understanding that his moral choices had weight, that his soul was a measurable thing that could be eroded by compromise and neglect. He'd been given a warning and a chance to change course before he degraded to the point where restoration became impossible. Frank Morrison continued driving trucks for another 6 years before retiring. But he drove differently after the way station encounter. He kept meticulous logs, never cutting corners. He reported unsafe vehicles even when it inconvenienced him. He picked up hitchhikers in distress. He told the truth to dispatchers, customers, and DOT inspectors, even when lies would have been easier. And sometimes, late at night on empty highways, Frank would weigh his choices consciously, asking himself, will this decision cost me soul mass? Will this compromise make me less than I am? More often than not, that question was enough to guide him toward better behavior. Frank never encountered the soul-measuring way station again, but he knew it was still out there, monitoring drivers, flagging those whose souls had degraded below safe thresholds, offering remediation to those willing to confront their own moral failings. The way station that measured souls taught Frank that morality has weight, that ethics aren't abstract philosophy but measurable properties of consciousness, and that the small compromises drivers make, the lies, the shortcuts, the cruelties born of loneliness and stress, accumulate over time into substantial losses of humanity, eroding the soul gram by gram until nothing remains but a hollow operator moving cargo without conscience, without empathy, without any remnant of the person who first climbed behind the wheel decades ago. Story 4. The rest area where everyone slept. Douglas Chen had been driving trucks for 14 years when he pulled into the rest area on Interstate 90 in Montana that he should have recognized as wrong immediately. But fatigue clouds judgment, and Douglas was exhausted after 11 hours of driving through a snowstorm. All he wanted was to park, sleep for 8 hours, and continue his route from Seattle to Minneapolis refreshed and legal. The rest area appeared in his headlights around 3 a.m. in January of 2023. A standard facility, parking lot, restroom building, vending machines, scattered picnic tables buried in snow. About a dozen other trucks were parked there, their cabs dark, drivers presumably sleeping. Douglas found a spot at the far end of the lot, shut down his engine, and prepared for sleep. He set his phone alarm for 11 a.m., giving himself 8 hours of rest. He climbed into his sleeper berth, pulled the curtain, and was unconscious within minutes. The sleep was deep, dreamless, the kind of total shutdown that comes from genuine exhaustion. Douglas woke to his alarm blaring. He fumbled for his phone and silenced it, then checked the time. 11:03 a.m. Perfect. 8 hours of sleep, exactly what he'd needed. Douglas felt refreshed, alert, ready to drive. He climbed out of his sleeper berth and opened his cab door, expecting to see morning light and other drivers preparing to leave. Instead, he saw darkness. Complete darkness. The rest area was still deep in night, the only illumination coming from a few overhead lights in the parking lot. Douglas checked his phone again. 11:03 a.m., but the darkness outside said it was still night. He looked at the clock on his dashboard. It showed 3:41 a.m., only 41 minutes after he'd parked and gone to sleep. The discrepancy made no sense. Douglas climbed fully out of his truck and looked at the sky. Stars shone overhead, impossibly bright in the clear winter air. It was definitely still night. But his phone insisted it was 11:03 a.m. Douglas walked toward the restroom building, intending to splash water on his face and figure out what was happening. As he passed the other parked trucks, he noticed something disturbing. All of them were still dark, still silent. Not a single driver had woken up or moved. In a normal rest area, there should have been activity. Drivers starting engines, conducting inspections, preparing to depart. But every truck remained dormant. Douglas knocked on a few cab doors. No response. He peered through windows and saw drivers sleeping in their berths, motionless, not even the slight movements of people in normal sleep. They looked dead or in comas, though Douglas could see shallow breathing if he watched carefully enough. He tried his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Lone Wolf at the rest area eastbound on I-90. Is anyone awake? Anyone hearing this?" Silence. Not even static. The radio frequency was completely dead. Douglas's phone showed 11:17 a.m. now. But outside, the darkness hadn't changed at all. The sun should have been up, the day well advanced. Instead, it remained deep night, as if time had stopped at 3:41 a.m. and refused to progress. Douglas tried to start his truck, thinking he'd just leave this strange place. But when he turned the key, nothing happened. The engine wouldn't turn over, the electrical system wouldn't engage. His truck was dead, or maybe not dead, but frozen, locked in the same temporal stasis that had trapped everyone else. Panic began to set in. Douglas walked to the rest area building and found the doors locked. Through the windows, he could see the interior, bathrooms, vending area, information displays, but he couldn't enter. The building had become inaccessible, sealed off. Douglas walked back through the parking lot, checking every truck, calling out to sleeping drivers who wouldn't wake. He was the only conscious person in a rest area that had become trapped in time, existing in a perpetual 3:41 a.m. while the rest of the world moved forward into morning, afternoon, evening, and beyond. He checked his phone repeatedly. The time continued advancing, 11:45 a.m., 12:13 p.m., 2:37 p.m. But the external world remained frozen at 3:41 a.m. Douglas was aging, experiencing time normally, while the rest area and everyone in it remained locked in a single moment. As hours passed on his phone, though the darkness never changed, Douglas explored more thoroughly. He found something disturbing carved into the restroom building's exterior wall. "Trapped since November 12, 2019. Time moves, but world doesn't. We are starving to death in frozen moment." The message was scratched into concrete, done with something sharp over what must have been many hours. Someone else had been aware in this trapped rest area, had experienced the same temporal anomaly Douglas was now experiencing. That person had been here since 2019, 3 years ago. Had they starved? Douglas didn't see any bodies, but maybe the frozen moment prevented death just as it prevented waking. Douglas's phone showed 6:48 p.m. He'd been awake in this frozen rest area for 15 hours, according to his phone's clock. He was getting hungry, thirsty. His body was aging and demanding resources, even though the rest area remained locked at 3:41 a.m. He tried everything he could think of to escape. He attempted to walk away from the rest area, but found he couldn't leave the parking lot. Some invisible barrier prevented him from crossing the boundary. He tried to wake other drivers by physically shaking them, shouting, even pouring his emergency water supply over their faces. Nothing worked. They remained locked in sleep, trapped in the frozen moment. Douglas's phone showed 11:23 p.m. 20 hours had passed for him. He was exhausted again despite having slept 8 hours. His body wanted more rest, but Douglas was terrified of sleeping. What if he couldn't wake up again? What if sleep in this place trapped you permanently in the frozen moment? He fought to stay awake, pacing the parking lot, slapping himself, doing jumping jacks in the snow. His phone ticked forward. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. 23 hours since he'd woken initially. Douglas's body was screaming for sleep. At 3:41 a.m. on his phone, exactly 24 hours after he'd first parked, something changed. The stars overhead shifted slightly. Time began moving again in the external world. The darkness started to lighten toward dawn. The frozen moment was releasing. Douglas heard engines starting. Other drivers were waking up, beginning their morning routines, completely unaware that they'd been trapped in temporal stasis. Douglas ran to the nearest truck and banged on the door. A driver opened it, looking confused and annoyed. "What's your emergency?" the driver asked. "What time is it?" Douglas demanded. "About 3:45 a.m. Why?" "Check your phone. Tell me what date it shows." The driver pulled out his phone and looked at the screen. "January 18th. Look, buddy, if you're having some kind of episode..." "What time did you arrive here?" "I don't know, maybe 11 p.m. yesterday." "Why?" The driver thought he'd slept for about 5 hours. He had no awareness of the temporal loop, of being trapped at 3:41 a.m. while Douglas experienced an entire day. Douglas checked his own phone. It showed January 19th, 3:44 a.m. His phone had advanced 24 hours while everyone else's had advanced normally. Douglas had lived through a full day while the rest area remained frozen, and only he had been conscious for it. He got back in his truck. The engine started normally now. Douglas drove out of the rest area without looking back, merging onto I-90 and continuing east. He drove straight through to Minneapolis without stopping, too afraid to park at another rest area, too terrified of being trapped in another temporal loop. When Douglas reached Minneapolis and checked his delivery schedule, he found he was a day late. He'd left Seattle on schedule, but 24 hours had been added to his journey. The 24 hours he'd spent trapped in the frozen rest area, aging and experiencing time while everyone else slept in stasis. Douglas tried to report what had happened, but had no proof. His phone showed the date progression, but that could be explained by manually changing settings. His log showed the correct elapsed time. There was no evidence of the temporal loop except Douglas's own exhausted state and his memory of those 24 hours of being the only conscious person in a frozen moment. Over the following months, Douglas researched the rest area. He found scattered reports of drivers experiencing lost time at that location, arriving, sleeping, and waking to find more time had passed than they'd experienced. But Douglas's experience was the opposite. He'd experienced more time than had actually passed in the external world. He theorized that the rest area existed in a temporal loop that reset every 24 hours. Everyone who parked there became trapped at 3:41 a.m., sleeping in stasis while the loop repeated. But occasionally someone would wake up during the loop, would be conscious while trapped, and would experience the full 24 hours while everyone else remained frozen. Those aware individuals aged a day while the world aged only minutes. Douglas never returned to that rest area. He marked it in his GPS as a location to avoid, but he heard stories from other drivers about the place. Reports of strange time discrepancies, of feeling disoriented after sleeping there, of trucks that parked for quick breaks and emerged hours later, their drivers confused about how much time had actually passed. The rest area where everyone slept taught Douglas that some places exist in temporal loops, repeating the same moments over and over, trapping anyone who enters during the wrong phase. Most people pass through without awareness, locked in sleep during the frozen moments. But occasionally someone wakes up, experiences the loop consciously, and ages 24 hours while the world ages only minutes, returning to normal time exhausted, confused, and a day older than they should be, with memories of being the only conscious person in a frozen world that nobody believes existed. Story 5. The Load That Changed Weight. Victor Santos had been hauling freight for 23 years, and he'd carried just about everything that could legally be transported by truck. Furniture, electronics, food products, industrial equipment, building materials. Victor had loaded and unloaded it all. But in May of 2023, he accepted a load from a broker in Louisiana that violated the fundamental laws of physics in ways that made Victor question his understanding of reality. The pickup was at a nondescript warehouse outside of Shreveport. The load was described as laboratory equipment, with a weight listed as 38,000 pounds, well within Victor's truck's capacity and legal weight limits. The delivery destination was a research facility in Colorado, a straightforward 2-day drive along Interstate 20 and then north through Texas and into Colorado. Victor backed his trailer up to the warehouse dock and workers loaded a dozen large crates secured on pallets. The crates were metallic, unmarked except for handling labels that said, "Fragile, maintain upright, do not X-ray." Victor didn't ask what was inside. After 23 years, he'd learned that asking questions about cargo usually didn't get you answers and sometimes got you problems. He secured the load properly, closed and sealed the trailer, and stopped at a nearby truck scale to verify his weight before hitting the road. The scale registered 79,200 pounds total. His empty truck weight of 41,000 pounds plus the 38,000-pound load plus some rounding, legal and proper. Victor started driving west on Interstate 20, making good time through Louisiana and into Texas. He stopped for fuel in Marshall, Texas, around noon. As he was filling his tanks, Victor glanced at his trailer and noticed something odd. The trailer's suspension appeared more compressed than it should have been for a 38,000-pound load. The trailer was sitting lower on its springs than Victor expected. He dismissed it as a trick of perspective and continued driving. But over the next hour, Victor became increasingly aware that his truck was handling differently. The acceleration was sluggish, as if he were pulling more weight than he should be. His fuel economy dropped noticeably. And when he crested a hill west of Longview, the truck struggled more than it should have with this weight. At his next fuel stop, Victor checked his truck thoroughly. Everything appeared normal. No leaks, no mechanical issues, tires properly inflated. But when Victor stood back and looked at his trailer, he was certain it was sitting lower on the suspension than it had been that morning. He found a truck scale at the fuel stop and drove onto it, expecting to see the same 79,200 pounds he'd registered that morning. Instead, the scale showed 90,800 pounds. His load had gained 14,600 pounds in 4 hours of driving. Victor stared at the scale reading, then drove off and back on, thinking it was malfunctioning. The reading remained the same, 93,800 pounds. Impossible. He hadn't loaded anything additional. The trailer seals were intact. There was no explanation for the weight gain except equipment error. But Victor's truck was struggling as if it really were pulling 93,000 pounds. The physics matched the impossible scale reading. Victor called his broker. "I've got a problem with the load from Shreveport. The weight is showing wrong." "What do you mean, wrong?" "It's gained weight. I scaled at 79,000 this morning. Now I'm showing 94,000. That's not possible." A long pause. "Mr. Santos, the cargo you're carrying has unusual properties. It's experimental equipment that generates its own gravitational field. The field strengthens over time, causing the effective weight to increase. This is normal and expected." "Normal? I'm going to be overweight. I'll get cited at every weigh station between here and Colorado." "You won't. The cargo includes documentation that exempts it from standard weight regulations. If you encounter any issues with DOT, provide them with the contact number in your paperwork. They'll handle it." "What the hell am I carrying?" "That's classified. Just deliver it to Colorado. The weight increase will stabilize at around 100,000 pounds and won't exceed that. You're equipped to handle it." "My truck's rated for 80,000 pounds total." The gravitational field generated by the cargo actually assists with traction and stability. You'll find the truck handles better than you'd expect at higher weights. Trust the process, Mr. Santos. The broker disconnected before Victor could argue further. Victor sat in his truck, staring at his phone, trying to process what he'd been told. The cargo generated its own gravitational field? That was science fiction, not reality. Gravitational fields required massive amounts of mass, planets, stars, black holes, not laboratory equipment that fit in a dozen crates. But the scale didn't lie. His truck weighed 93,800 pounds and it was still gaining. Victor continued driving, watching his trailer's suspension compress steadily over the following hours. By evening, when he stopped at a rest area near Abilene, Texas, the trailer was sitting so low that Victor could barely fit his hand between the tires and the wheel wells. The suspension was compressed to its limit. He scaled again. 400 pounds. The load had gained over 22 tons since morning. Victor's truck was pulling 101,000 pounds, massively overweight, but somehow it was handling it. The broker had been right about that. Despite the impossible weight, Victor's truck accelerated normally, braked properly, and handled curves without difficulty. It was as if the gravitational field the cargo generated was being directed downward, providing enhanced traction without actually crushing the truck's components. But Victor couldn't shake his growing dread. What kind of equipment generated gravitational fields? What was he really transporting? And what would happen when he delivered it to Colorado? That night, parked at the rest area, Victor tried to sleep but couldn't. He kept thinking about the cargo in his trailer, about the increasing gravity field, about the impossibility of what was happening. Around midnight, Victor decided to look at the cargo directly. He broke the trailer seal, something he wasn't supposed to do, and opened the rear doors. The crates sat exactly where they'd been loaded, secured properly to pallets. But the crates themselves were wrong. They appeared denser than they should be, as if the space they occupied was somehow compressed, containing more material than their physical dimensions suggested. Looking at them made Victor's eyes hurt, his brain struggling to process spatial relationships that didn't match normal geometry. And the crates were humming. A low-frequency vibration that Victor felt in his bones more than heard with his ears. The hum had a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat, regular and organic. Victor closed the trailer doors quickly and resealed them with his spare seal. He didn't want to look at the cargo anymore. Whatever it was beyond his understanding, beyond his willingness to comprehend. He tried to call the broker again, to demand more information or to refuse the load entirely. But his phone wouldn't connect. Every call to the broker's number failed immediately. Victor tried calling other numbers, his dispatcher, his family, anyone, but none of the calls would go through. His phone showed full signal strength, but it was as if the cargo was creating an interference field that blocked communications. Victor made a decision. He'd deliver the load as contracted, but he'd never accept another job from this broker. Never haul laboratory equipment again without knowing exactly what it was. He continued driving the next day, crossing into New Mexico and then Colorado. The cargo's weight stabilized at 102,000 pounds as the broker had promised. Victor's truck handled it with impossible ease, as if the gravitational field was selectively applying force only where it was needed for traction. The delivery destination was a facility in the mountains west of Colorado Springs, accessed by a winding road that led deep into a forested valley. The facility had no signs, no markings, just a security gate with armed guards who checked Victor's credentials and waved him through. Inside, technicians unloaded the cargo with specialized equipment. They wouldn't let Victor near the crates, wouldn't explain what they were, just unloaded them efficiently and had Victor sign the delivery confirmation. As Victor drove away from the facility, his truck felt impossibly light. After pulling 102,000 pounds for 2 days, the empty 41,000-pound truck felt like it might float away. Victor's whole sense of weight and mass had been recalibrated by the experience. He stopped at the first truck scale he found and verified his weight. 41,000 pounds. Normal. His truck was back to its standard empty weight. Victor drove back to Louisiana, collected his pay, and told the broker he wasn't available for any more work. He didn't explain why, just made it clear he wouldn't accept future loads from this particular source. Over the following months, Victor researched gravitational field generation and found scattered references to experimental physics programs, trying to manipulate gravity on small scales. Most of the research was theoretical, but some projects claim to have achieved localized gravitational effects using exotic matter and massive energy inputs. Victor concluded he'd transported some kind of prototype gravitational field generator, probably military or advanced research, something that created its own gravity as a side effect of its operation. The weight gain wasn't the cargo getting heavier. It was the cargo generating increased gravitational pull, effectively creating more weight through artificial gravity rather than through additional mass. But that realization didn't make Victor feel better. He'd transported something that violated fundamental physics, something that could generate gravitational fields without planetary masses. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Victor Santos continued driving trucks, but he became far more selective about what loads he accepted. He avoided laboratory equipment, refused jobs from brokers he didn't know personally, and always asked detailed questions about cargo before accepting. And Victor never forgot the feeling of pulling 102,000 pounds in a truck rated for 80,000, the impossible sensation of weight that shouldn't exist being somehow manageable through artificially generated gravity. The experience taught him that technology had advanced far beyond public knowledge, that experimental equipment being transported on public highways sometimes bent the laws of physics in ways that made reality itself questionable. The load that changed weight taught Victor that cargo isn't always what it appears to be, that laboratory equipment might mean devices that generate artificial gravity, and that sometimes truckers become unwitting participants in experiments testing technology that shouldn't exist. Transporting equipment that violates physics while driving down normal highways, carrying increasing weight that somehow becomes manageable through forces that transform trucks into temporary test beds for sciences beyond conventional understanding. Story 6. The CB Voice That Knew Your Name. Angela Martinez had been driving trucks for 16 years, and her CB radio had been a constant companion throughout that time. The chatter of other drivers, the warnings about speed traps, the occasional jokes and stories shared over the airwaves, all of it made the lonely miles more bearable. Angela monitored Channel 19 religiously, the unofficial trucker channel where most communication happened. But in August of 2023, Angela began hearing a voice on her CB that shouldn't have been possible. A voice that knew her name, knew her location, and knew things about her life that no stranger could know. It started on a run from Phoenix to Oklahoma City, a straight shot along Interstate 40 through New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle. Angela was somewhere in eastern Arizona around midnight, when her CB crackled to life with a transmission unlike any she'd heard before. "Angela Martinez," the voice said. Male, middle-aged, with no regional accent. "You need to exit at the next off-ramp. There's something wrong with your trailer's left rear tire. It's going to blow in approximately 18 miles if you don't address it." Angela's hands tightened on the wheel. The voice had used her full name. She grabbed her CB handset. "Who is this? How do you know my name?" No response. The channel went back to normal chatter. Other drivers discussing weather, traffic, road conditions. Angela waited a few minutes, then called out again. "This is Big A heading east on 40. Did anyone just transmit a message about my tires?" "Negative, Big A," another driver responded. "Haven't heard anything about tires." Angela checked her mirrors, looking at her trailer's tires. They all appeared normal from what she could see, but the voice had been so specific, so certain, and it had known her name. She decided to exit at the next off-ramp and inspect her tires. Better safe than sorry, especially if someone had noticed something wrong from another vehicle. At the truck stop, Angela did a thorough walk-around. When she reached the left rear trailer tire, she found the problem immediately. A shard of metal embedded in the tire, slowly leaking air. The tire wasn't flat yet, but it would have been within a few miles. If she'd been driving at highway speed when it blew, the results could have been catastrophic. Angela stared at the damaged tire, her mind racing. The CB voice had been right. Whoever it was had known about a problem Angela herself hadn't detected. But how? And how had they known her name? She got the tire repaired and continued her route. But over the next week, the voice returned multiple times, always when Angela was alone on the highway late at night. "Angela, there's black ice ahead on the bridge at mile marker 247. Slow to 40 miles per hour. Angela, the truck stop at exit 132 has contaminated diesel. Skip it and fuel at exit 156 instead. Angela, the car in front of you is about to brake suddenly. Increase your following distance." Every warning was accurate. Every prediction came true. The voice was somehow monitoring Angela's driving, predicting hazards before they manifested, keeping her safe through information that shouldn't be accessible to a random CB user. Angela tried to track the voice. She'd call out immediately after each transmission, asking who it was, where they were located, how they knew these things. She never got a response. The voice only transmitted warnings, never engaged in conversation. Other drivers couldn't hear it. Angela would ask on the CB if anyone else had heard the transmissions, and nobody had. The voice was somehow broadcasting directly to her radio, messages only she could receive. Then the warnings became more personal, more disturbing. "Angela, your mother is going to call you in 4 minutes with bad news about your father's health. Pull over before answering so you can focus on the conversation." 4 minutes later, Angela's phone rang. Her mother's number. Angela pulled onto the shoulder, her heart racing. She answered. Her mother was crying. "Angela, it's your father. He had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. They think he'll be okay, but... Can you come home?" Angela sat in her truck, stunned. The voice had predicted her mother's call, had known about her father's heart attack before Angela's family had even contacted her. That level of prediction went beyond monitoring road conditions or tire pressure. It suggested something far more impossible: precognition, knowledge of future events, awareness that transcended normal causality. "Who are you?" Angela screamed into her CB handset after the call with her mother ended. "How do you know these things? What do you want from me?" The voice responded for the first time to her direct question. "I'm trying to help you, Angela. I'm trying to keep you safe, keep you on the right path. There are many possible futures, many ways your life could unfold. I'm steering you toward the better outcomes." By predicting the future? That's impossible. Not impossible, difficult but not impossible. I exist slightly outside your timeline, able to perceive probable futures and communicate backward through time to influence present decisions. I've been watching you for years, Angela, protecting you, guiding you away from the worst possibilities. Why me? Why are you watching me? Because in most timelines you die. Car accident, medical emergency, violent crime. The circumstances vary, but the outcome is consistent. You don't survive past your 38th birthday in the majority of possible futures. I'm trying to extend your life, to guide you toward the few timelines where you survive longer. Angela felt ice water flood through her veins. How old am I now? 37 years and 11 months. You have approximately 2 weeks until the point where most timelines converge toward your death. I'm doing everything I can to prevent it, but I need your cooperation. You have to listen to my warnings, follow my guidance exactly. This is insane. You're not real. I'm having a breakdown from too many years on the road. I'm real. And if you don't believe me, ignore my next warning and see what happens. In 3 hours, you'll approach a rest area at mile marker 89. I'm going to tell you not to stop there. If you stop anyway, you'll be robbed at gunpoint by 2 men who've been targeting drivers. They'll take your money, your phone, and in some timelines they'll kill you. Don't stop there. Continue to the next rest area 30 miles beyond. The transmission ended. Angela drove in silence, trying to decide if she was experiencing genuine precognition or descending into madness. She had 3 hours to make a choice: listen to the voice or test it by ignoring the warning. When Angela reached mile marker 89, she saw the rest area. It looked normal, safe, with a few trucks parked there. Angela's instinct was to stop. She needed a bathroom break, needed to stretch her legs. But the voice's warning echoed in her mind. They'll kill you in some timelines. Angela drove past the rest area without stopping. 30 miles later, she pulled into the next facility. She used the restroom, grabbed coffee, and was walking back to her truck when she heard other drivers talking in agitated voices. Did you hear? There was an armed robbery at the rest area back at mile marker 89. 2 guys with guns hit 3 different trucks, took money and phones. One driver tried to resist and got shot. He's being airlifted to a hospital. Angela felt her legs go weak. The voice had been right. If she'd stopped at that rest area, she would have been one of the robbery victims, possibly the one who got shot. The voice returned that night. You're starting to believe. Good. That makes the next 2 weeks crucial. There are specific decisions you need to make, specific actions you need to take. If you follow my guidance, you'll survive past your 38th birthday and enter a new set of possible futures where you live significantly longer. What decisions? I'll tell you as each moment approaches. For now, just know that the timeline is malleable but constrained. Some things are fixed, some things are variable. I can guide you through the variables, but I can't change the fixed points. Your father's heart attack was fixed. It happened in every timeline. But whether you make it home in time to see him before complications develop, that's variable. That depends on choices you make over the next several days. Angela made those choices. She followed the voice's guidance, taking specific routes, stopping at specific times, even calling her mother at a precise moment to share medical information that the doctors needed. And Angela's father survived, entered recovery, was released from the hospital. The voice had saved her father's life by steering Angela toward the timeline where her information and presence made the critical difference. But as Angela's 38th birthday approached, the voice's warnings became more frequent and more urgent. Angela realized she was approaching some kind of nexus point, a moment where multiple timelines converged toward her death, and only by making exactly the right series of choices could she survive past it. On the night before her birthday, the voice gave her final instructions. Tomorrow at 2:47 p.m., you'll be driving through downtown Dallas on your way to a delivery. A drunk driver will run a red light at the intersection of Commerce and Harwood. In most timelines, he hits your truck. You swerve to avoid him and lose control. Your truck jackknifes. You crash into a building. You die instantly. But if you're in the right lane instead of the left lane, if you're going 43 miles per hour instead of 50, if you brake at exactly 2:47:08 p.m., you'll miss the drunk driver by 3 feet. He'll crash into a light pole behind you. You'll drive away unharmed. That's the path to survival. How can I hit all those precise conditions? Angela asked. I'll guide you. Tomorrow, listen carefully to my directions. Follow them exactly. Trust me, Angela. I've been keeping you alive for years. Tomorrow is just one more day, one more series of choices. You can do this. The next day, Angela drove toward Dallas with her heart hammering. The voice provided continuous guidance, directing her lane changes, her speed adjustments, her exact position on the road. At 2:47 p.m., Angela was in the right lane, going exactly 43 miles per hour, approaching the intersection of Commerce and Harwood. Brake now, the voice said. Hard brake. Angela slammed her brakes. Her truck shuddered, slowing rapidly, and a pickup truck ran the red light from her left, passing directly through the space where Angela's truck would have been if she hadn't braked. The pickup continued through the intersection and crashed into a light pole on the far side, exactly as the voice had predicted. Angela drove past the accident scene, shaking, barely able to hold the wheel steady. She'd survived. The voice had guided her through the precise series of choices that allowed her to avoid death at the exact moment where most timelines converge toward her dying. "Happy birthday, Angela," the voice said. "You've entered a new set of possible futures now. Most of them are long. You'll live into your 70s in the majority of these timelines. I've done what I could. The rest is up to you." "Will I hear from you again?" Angela asked. "Probably not. My connection to your timeline weakens now that you've passed the nexus point. I exist in your future, and the further you get from the moment where you should have died, the harder it becomes for me to reach backward and communicate with your present. But I'll still be here, watching from the future, seeing how your life unfolds. Live well, Angela. Make good choices. The timeline you're in now is one of the better ones." The voice faded. Angela never heard it again on her CB radio. Angela Martinez continued driving trucks for another 15 years before retiring. She lived to celebrate her 71st birthday with her family, including her father, who survived another decade after his heart attack. And throughout those years, Angela wondered about the voice. Had it been a future version of herself, reaching back through time to prevent her own death? Or was it something else? An AI from the future, a time traveler, some entity that existed outside normal causality and took interest in keeping certain people alive? Angela never found answers, but she knew the voice had been real, had saved her life multiple times, had guided her through the precise series of choices necessary to survive past a point where most possible futures converged toward death. The CB voice that knew your name taught Angela that time isn't as linear as it appears, that the future can sometimes reach backward to influence the present, and that somewhere ahead in the timeline, something or someone with knowledge of possible futures sometimes chooses to intervene, sending warnings through CB radios to drivers who would otherwise die, steering them toward better outcomes, keeping them alive through information that shouldn't exist but does, transmitted backward through time by voices that know your name and see all the ways your life could end, working to guide you toward the timelines where you survive.